Some stories don't announce themselves. They don't come with warning signs or dramatic build-ups or any kind of preparation at all. They just happen, suddenly, completely in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, and by the time you understand what you are witnessing, something inside you has already shifted in a way that will not shift back. If you are someone who has ever lost a person and learned to live with that loss, this story is for you. And before we go any further, please take 1 second right now to hit that like button and subscribe, because this channel is built on exactly these moments. The ones that remind you what human beings are actually capable of. The ones that make the world feel a little less cold and a little more possible. What happened on that Family Feud stage on a Wednesday afternoon in November 2023 did not just shock one woman out of 4 years of grief. It rearranged something in everyone who was present, and it will rearrange something in you too. Stay with us. Every single word of this story matters. Maya Akafer was 31 years old, and she had the particular kind of stillness that belongs to people who have learned, through hard experience, how to hold themselves together in public. She was a third-grade teacher in Atlanta, Georgia. The kind of teacher parents specifically request. The kind whose former students come back years later just to say hello. The kind who keeps a jar of individually wrapped caramels on her desk because she remembers being 8 years old and knowing that small kindnesses are not small at all. She was warm and funny and fully present in every room she entered, and if you met her at a school function or a birthday party or a Sunday afternoon barbecue, you would come away thinking, that woman has it together. You would not necessarily see what was underneath. Most people didn't. Maya had become very good at making sure of that. What was underneath was a grief so specific and so constant that she had stopped expecting it to go away. She had simply organized her life around it, the way you organize a room around a piece of furniture too heavy to move. You stop noticing it after a while, or rather, you notice it every single day, but you stop being surprised by it. It just becomes part of the architecture of your life, present and load-bearing and immovable. Her brother's name was Tobias. Toby, she called him. Everyone called him Toby except their mother, who called him by his full name only when he was in trouble, which was frequently enough that Tobias was not an unusual sound in the Akafer household growing up. He was 4 years older than Maya, which meant he had been her whole world in the way that older siblings sometimes are when you are young, the person who knew all the rules before you did, who explained things, who walked ahead of you into every new situation and came back with a report. He was the one who told her what middle school was actually like, not the version the teachers described. He was the one who sat with her at the kitchen table at midnight the week before her driving test and quizzed her on road signs until she got every single one right. He was the one who called her every Sunday without fail for years, not always with anything particular to say, just to call, because calling was the way he said, I am still here, and so are you, and that matters to me. Toby was an electrician. He worked for a contracting company in Atlanta for 11 years and was good enough at it that he had recently been talking about starting his own business. He had a laugh that took over his whole face, a habit of quoting obscure 90s movies at inappropriate moments, a daughter named Amara who was 6 years old and had inherited his exact laugh, and a way of entering a room that made the room feel more inhabited, more alive, more like a place where good things might happen. He was not a dramatic person. He was not especially complicated. He was just deeply, consistently, reliably himself, and in Maya's experience, that was the rarest and most valuable thing a person could be. In January 2020, Toby was involved in a serious accident on a worksite, a structural failure. He was taken to the hospital by emergency services. The injuries were severe enough that for the first 72 hours, the doctors were not optimistic. Maya and her mother, Patricia, sat in a hospital waiting room for 3 days straight, sleeping in shifts in plastic chairs, eating whatever someone brought them from the vending machine, updating the family group chat with information that grew increasingly grim and then went, for a period of about 18 hours, completely silent while the doctors did what they could. On the 4th day, something changed, not in the right direction. The update Maya sent to the family that afternoon was 4 words long and told them to come quickly. By the time most of them arrived, there was nothing left to come quickly for. Toby was gone. He was 35 years old. Amara was 6. Their mother, Patricia, sat in the plastic chair and looked at the floor and said nothing for a very long time, and Maya stood beside her and held her hand and felt the world reconfigure itself around a new and permanent absence. What followed was the year that was also, for the whole world, a year of isolation and grief, and the particular cruelty of not being able to gather and mourn properly. There was a funeral that was small because of restrictions and large in feeling, attended by more people over a streaming link than were permitted in the room. There was Amara, confused and brave in the specific heartbreaking way of 6-year-olds who know something terrible has happened, but not yet the full dimensions of what it means. There was Patricia, who aged in a way that had nothing to do with time. And there was Maya, who went back to her third graders 6 weeks after the funeral because being in that classroom was the only place she knew how to be useful. And usefulness, in the absence of everything else, was something to hold on to. She had not stopped grieving. She had simply learned to grieve while also teaching reading comprehension and refilling the caramel jar, and calling her mother every evening and living the full, warm, apparently intact life that the people around her could see. She had learned to carry Toby the way her mother had taught her to carry all difficult things, quietly, steadily, without asking for more space than you've been given. What Maya did not know, what she had absolutely no way of knowing, was that in the hospital, in those first chaotic hours after the accident, something had happened that no one had told her about. Not because anyone was being cruel. Because in the terror and confusion of the 72 hours, amid the phone calls and the waiting and the shifting prognoses and the arrival of family members from 3 different states, a piece of information had gotten lost in the way that information sometimes gets lost in crises, not buried, not hidden, just missed. Slipped through a gap between one conversation and the next. The full truth of what happened in that hospital, the truth that would eventually make its way to a Family Feud producer named Diane, who had a cousin who was a nurse in that building, who had been carrying this story for 4 years wondering if there was a way to do something with it, was this. Tobias Ockaffer had not died in that hospital room. He had been in a coma for 11 days. He had woken up to find himself in a facility he didn't immediately recognize, with injuries that had affected his memory in ways that took months of slow, painstaking work to begin to untangle. He had a brain injury. He had lost, for a period that stretched far longer than anyone could have predicted, the clear and reliable access to his own past that most of us take entirely for granted. He knew his name. He knew fragments. But the connective tissue of his life, the people, the places, the phone numbers, the Sunday calls, had come apart in ways that physical therapy and speech therapy and cognitive rehabilitation worked on week by week, month by month, with results that were real but slow. By the time Toby had recovered enough to begin searching for his family in earnest, he found something that devastated him in a way none of his recoveries had prepared him for. The family had moved. His mother's phone number had changed during a carrier switch 18 months after the accident. Maya had moved apartments. The digital trail was thin in the specific places he needed it to be thick. He had found the names. He could not find the doors. And every avenue he tried led to a silence that he could not tell apart from the outside, from the silence of people who were not there to be found. He did not know they thought he was dead. They did not know he was alive. Diane, the producer, had spent 8 months confirming what she had been told before she brought it to the show's team. She was not going to do this wrong. She hired a private investigator. She spoke to the rehabilitation facility's social worker, who was permitted to confirm certain facts without violating privacy. She spoke to Toby, who by the time she reached him in the summer of 2023 was living in a rented room in Savannah, working part-time at a hardware store, spending his free time trying to rebuild the map of his own life, one recovered fragment at a time. He was not the Toby who had walked into rooms and made them more alive. It was something quieter, more careful, a man who had survived something enormous and was still, 4 years later, working out what exactly he had survived and who he was on the other side of it. But when Diane told him what she was proposing, something crossed his face that the rehabilitation facility staff had told her to watch for and had never quite seen. The expression of a man who has been looking for a door and has just been shown where it is. "She thinks I'm gone," he said. His voice was level. His hands were not. "Yes," Diane said. "Your whole family does." A long pause, then. "I need you to help me get this right, whatever it takes. I need it to be right." It took 4 months to arrange. The show brought in a grief counselor to consult on the process. They spoke at length with a trauma specialist about the psychological impact of what they were planning and how to structure it to minimize harm and maximize the support available to Maya in the room. They arranged for a private family counselor to be on site throughout the taping. They were not cavalier about this. They understood that they were handling something fragile enough to shatter if mishandled, something that had the power to heal or to wound depending entirely on how carefully it was held. They held it carefully. Maya was told only that her family had applied for Family Feud and been accepted. Her cousin Deshawn, who was in on the plan and deserved some kind of award for the 4 months of secret keeping required, had handled the application. Maya's mother, Patricia, had been told a version of the truth 2 weeks before the taping, not everything, but enough. Enough to prepare her. Enough to let her sleep for the first time in 4 years without dreaming about plastic chairs. Patricia had asked the producer one question, and only one. Is he okay? Diane had answered honestly. He is getting there. He is better than he was, and he has been working very hard to get back to you. Patricia had nodded slowly and said nothing more, and then excused herself to the bathroom where she stayed for a while, and when she came back her eyes were dry and her chin was steady, and she said, "Tell me what you need me to do." The taping day arrived the way significant days often do, ordinary on its surface, unremarkable in its early hours, the kind of morning where you drink your coffee and check your phone and have no idea what the afternoon is going to do to you. Maya wore a burnt orange blouse that she had bought specifically for this occasion because orange was a happy color, a celebrating color, and she was going to be on television and she wanted to look like someone who had things to celebrate. She did her hair. She put on her good earrings. She drove to the studio with Deshawn and her cousin Larissa and her Aunt Bev and spent the pre-show waiting time in the green room being charming and funny and entirely herself, the fully intact version of herself that she had carefully constructed over 4 years of quiet, determined living. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea. The Acaffer family was good on stage. They were naturally entertaining in the way of families who have spent years around a dinner table that valued quick thinking and a willingness to be wrong loudly. Deshawn in particular was a natural, and Maya found herself laughing, genuinely, fully, without effort, for the first time in what felt like longer than she could account for. Steve Harvey had them from the first minute. He had a gift for reading a room, and this room was generous and warm and responsive, and he worked with it the way a musician works with good acoustics, finding the notes that wanted to be found. But Steve Harvey also knew what was coming. He had been briefed in full. And if you watch the footage, the way he looks at Maya between questions, the quality of his attention when she laughs, the slight checking quality in his eyes every time he glances toward the side of the stage, you can see a man doing two things at once. Hosting the show and bearing witness to the last ordinary minutes of someone's life before it becomes something else entirely. He later said in an interview that those 45 minutes of the game were the longest 45 minutes he had ever spent on a stage. Every time she laughed, he said, I thought she doesn't know yet. This is the last laugh before she knows, and I didn't know whether what was coming was going to be the best thing that ever happened to her or whether it was going to be too much, whether anyone can actually be ready for something like that. He paused. But then I thought about 4 years. 4 years of carrying a brother she thought she lost. And I thought if there is a person alive who has earned this moment, it is her. It is absolutely her. When the game portion finished, Steve asked the family to stay for a moment. Same quiet, simple words, something special, just stay. Maya tilted her head at him with the alert, slightly suspicious expression of a third-grade teacher who has learned to notice when something is slightly off. Should I be worried? She asked. Steve looked at her for a moment with an expression that she would later describe as the kindest face she had ever seen on a person she had just met. No, he said. You should not be worried. A pause. You should hold on, though, hold on to something. Maya looked around, slightly confused, and took Deshawn's hand because he was nearest. Deshawn, who had been keeping this secret for 4 months and whose face was doing extraordinary things, held her hand back very tightly. Maya noticed that. She looked at him. Something in Deshawn's face, the brightness of his eyes, the particular set of his jaw, sent a signal to some part of her brain that she could not yet read. She turned back to Steve. What's happening? She said. Her voice was still steady, still composed, still the fully intact version of herself, but something underneath it had shifted slightly, the way the air shifts before weather. Steve Harvey took a breath. He spoke slowly and directly without theatrics, because the moment had enough weight of its own and did not need any decoration. Maya, he said. 4 years ago, your family went through something that no family should have to go through, and I know you have been carrying that ever since. I know because the people who love you told us that there has not been a single day in 4 years that you have not thought about your brother. Maya went very still. A stillness different from the composed stillness of before, this one had something fearful and hopeful mixed into it, a combination that has no clean name but is instantly recognizable on a human face. We found something out, Steve continued. Something that took a long time to confirm, and we wanted to be certain before we brought you here because you deserve certainty. You deserve the truth. He stopped. He looked at her. Maya, your brother is not gone. The silence that followed those 5 words lasted approximately 3 seconds. In terms of what it contained, it lasted much longer than that. Maya's face did not immediately respond the way faces respond in movies, with a clean, dramatic shift from one emotion to another. It did something more honest and more complicated than that. It froze, first. Then her brow pulled together in a confusion so genuine it was almost painful to witness. Then something moved across her eyes, not belief, not yet, but the first crack in disbelief, the first fissure in the 4-year-old certainty that had become the load-bearing wall of her grief. She looked at Deshawn. Deshawn was crying without any attempt to hide it. She looked at Larissa. Larissa had both hands over her mouth. She looked back at Steve Harvey, her lips parted. She said, barely above a whisper, "What did you just say to me?" And Steve Harvey said it again. "Your brother is not gone. He is here, he is right here, and he has been trying to find his way back to you for 4 years." Tobias Okafor walked out from the side of the stage. He walked slowly. Not because he was uncertain, he knew exactly where he was going, and he had been walking toward this moment in one form or another for 4 years. But slowly because his body understood the magnitude of what was happening and had decided, without asking permission, to treat this approach with the gravity it deserved. He was wearing a dark green jacket. He was heavier than Maya remembered and thinner in the face, and there was something in the way he carried himself that was different from the Tobai she had known, quieter, more deliberate, the walk of a man who has learned not to take steps for granted. But his face was entirely, unmistakably, irrevocably her brother's face. The same jaw, the same set of the eyes. The same thing that happened around his mouth when he was trying very hard not to cry, which was the same thing Maya's mouth did when she was trying very hard not to cry, which was something they had both gotten from their mother without knowing it. Maya made a sound that was not a word, and not quite a scream, and not exactly a sob, but was all of those things simultaneously. The sound of a woman whose load-bearing wall has just been revealed to have been load-bearing nothing. The sound of 4 years of organized, careful, diligently maintained grief collapsing all at once into something else entirely. She crossed the stage in a way that was not quite running and not quite walking. She covered the distance between her and her brother the way water covers a surface, completely, instantly, without hesitation. And when she reached him, she held him with both arms and her face pressed into his shoulder, and she made that sound again. And Tobai's arms came around her and he pressed his face into the top of her head. And they stood there in the center of that bright, ludicrous, wonderful game show stage and held each other with the total, unguarded desperation of two people who have been on opposite sides of an impossible distance and have finally closed it. The audience had ceased to be an audience. It had become something else, a collection of individuals, each privately undone, making no attempt to conceal it. A sound moved through the room that was not applause and not crying and not silence, but all three at once. A human sound, the sound of a room full of people recognizing something they know in their own bones even if they've never lived it. Something about loss and return and the particular mercy of being wrong about the worst thing you ever believed. Steve Harvey stood still. He had moved to one side to give them space, and he stood there with one arm crossed over his chest and his fist pressed against his mouth, and he did not speak. His eyes were full. He blinked once, twice, and let the tears come without doing anything about them, because there was nothing to do about them, because some things are too large for composure, and the honest response to this was the response his face was already giving without asking him first. When Maya and Tobai finally separated enough to see each other, not letting go, not even slightly, just pulling back enough to look, Maya cupped her brother's face in both her hands the way their mother had done when they were children, when someone was hurt or sick or scared and needed to be looked at directly and told they were seen. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she said in a voice scraped clean of everything except the truth, "I thought you were gone. I thought you were gone, Tobai." And Tobai, whose face was doing the thing their mouths did, said, I know, I was trying to get back. I was trying to get back to you the whole time." Maya pulled him in again. "You're here," she said into his shoulder. "You're here." He said, "I'm here." Steve Harvey walked toward them slowly. When he reached them, he put a hand gently on each of their backs and said nothing for a long moment, just stood there in the circle of it. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than his voice usually is on this stage. "Maya, I need you to know something." He waited until she looked at him. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever had the privilege of meeting, not because of today, because of every day for 4 years that you got up and you kept going and you kept loving and you kept teaching those kids and you kept your mother's hand in yours through all of it. That is not ordinary strength. That is extraordinary. And your brother," his voice tightened for just a moment, "your brother has been doing the same thing. Fighting his way back, every single day, fighting to get back to you." He paused. "You found each other. I don't know what you want to call that, but I call it a miracle, and I have been standing on this stage for a long time, and I don't use that word." Patricia, Maya's mother, was brought out a few minutes later. She had been waiting in a room off stage with the grief counselor, watching the reunion on a monitor, allowed to have her own private version of this moment before the cameras added her to it. When she walked out and saw her son standing on that stage, she stopped walking. She stood completely still for 3 full seconds. Then she said his name. Not Toby, Tobias. Full name, the name she had reserved her whole life for the moments that mattered most. And Tobias turned at the sound of it the way people turn toward their names when they are said by the right voice, completely, instinctively, with his whole body. Patricia walked to him with the calm, unhurried certainty of a woman who is done waiting and has no need to rush because the thing she has been waiting for is right there and is not going anywhere. She put her hands on her son's face. She looked at him. She said quietly, "There you are," as if he had simply stepped out for a moment, as if the 4 years were a long errand and he was back now and that was that. Toby made a sound that had no word for it. He held his mother. Patricia held him back. She closed her eyes and she held him back. Steve Harvey, watching this, put his face briefly in his hands, just for a moment. Then he straightened up and looked at the audience and found that the audience was in no better shape than he was. And he laughed, a wet, genuine, helpless laugh, and said, "I'm sorry, I promised myself." And the audience laughed too, that same wet, helpless laugh. And it broke the seal on something, and suddenly the room was both crying and laughing in the way rooms do when the emotion is too big for one response, and the only honest option is all of them at once. In the months after the episode aired, several things happened. Toby moved back to Atlanta, initially into a spare room in Patricia's house while he re-established himself and continued his ongoing rehabilitation work. Amara, his daughter, who had been raised by her maternal grandmother since the accident and who had grown from 6 to 10 years old in her father's absence, was reintroduced to him through a careful, counselor-guided process that neither rushed nor minimized the complexity of what a child needs when a parent returns from a long and confusing absence. It was not simple. It was not a movie moment. It was real, which meant it was sometimes awkward and sometimes painful, and sometimes involved sitting in a therapist's waiting room feeling uncertain. But it was also, underneath all of that, the beginning of something that Amara's grandmother, speaking to a reporter 3 months into the process, described as watching a flower figure out which direction the sun is. Slow, unmistakable, going in only one direction. Maya and Toby resumed their Sunday calls. Not immediately. There were weeks in the early months where in-person visits were frequent enough that the calls felt redundant, and weeks where the weight of everything that had happened sat heavily on both of them and conversation took a certain effort. But eventually, reliably, the calls came back. Sunday evenings, not always with anything particular to say, just calling because calling was how Toby said, "I am still here and so are you and that matters to me." Some things survive everything. Some things are simply what they are, beyond circumstance, beyond injury, beyond 4 years of impossible distance. The Sunday calls were that. Steve Harvey spoke about Maya and Toby in an interview, as he had spoken about Dorothy and James and Marcus Webb before them, as he spoke about all the moments on his stage that had reached past the format of the show into something larger. He was asked what he took away from it personally. He said, "I think about Maya teaching her kids every day. I think about her filling up that candy jar and explaining things to 8-year-olds and calling her mom every night, living a full life, a genuine life, and underneath all of it carrying this thing that she thought was permanent." He paused. "And then I think about Toby on the other side of the exact same loss, fighting his way back through something most people would not have survived, toward a door he could not find." Another pause. They were both doing the same thing, just from opposite sides. They were both just trying to close the distance. He was quiet for a moment. "That's what people do, that's the whole thing. We spend our whole lives trying to close the distance between ourselves and the people we love. And sometimes the distance wins, but sometimes," he stopped. "Sometimes you're wrong about the distance. Sometimes it's smaller than you think. And I got to be in the room when someone found that out. I don't take that lightly. I will never take that lightly. The distance between where you are and the person you are missing is not always what it looks like from where you are standing. That is the lesson this story leaves behind, sitting quietly in the place where the grief used to be so heavy. It does not promise that every absence is temporary. It does not claim that every person who is gone will walk back through a door. Loss is real. Some distances do not close. Maya Ackhafer knows that better than most, and she would not want anyone to use her story as a reason to deny the reality of grief or the permanence of some losses. But what she will tell you, what she has said, in the interviews she has given carefully and selectively since the episode aired, is this: do not be so certain of the architecture of your loss that you stop checking the door. Do not organize your life so completely around the permanent absence that you forget to leave a crack in the window. You might be wrong, and being wrong in this particular direction is the most extraordinary thing that can happen to a person. Toby is back in Atlanta. He is working again, slowly rebuilding toward the electrical business he had been planning before everything fell apart. His memory continues to improve in the patient, nonlinear way of all real recovery. Some days better than others, some weeks a step back, but the overall direction clear and holding. He coaches Amara's soccer team on Saturday mornings. He calls Maya on Sundays. He fills in the gaps in his own story piece by piece, the way you restore something valuable that was broken, carefully, without rushing, with the understanding that the restored version will have visible seams and that visible seams are not damage. They are history. They are proof of what was survived and what was worth surviving for. And Maya, every Monday morning, puts her key in the door of her third-grade classroom and turns on the lights and refills the caramel jar and writes the date on the whiteboard and is entirely present in the room where she is needed and wanted. The same warm, funny, fully intact teacher she has always been, with one difference that none of her students can see, but that she carries consciously, and with something she has decided to call gratitude rather than relief, because gratitude is larger and more durable. She knows now that the thing she thought was a permanent wall was a door. She knows now that the load-bearing structure of her grief was load-bearing something that is still there, still warm, still capable of calling her on Sunday evenings with nothing particular to say. She knows her brother is here. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is, in fact, everything. If this story reached something in you today, please give it a like and hit subscribe so you never miss a story like Maya and Toby's. Share it with someone in your life who is carrying something they think is permanent, because sometimes the most important thing one person can do for another is simply say, "Have you checked the door lately?" You might be wrong about the distance, and being wrong about this particular thing is the best mistake a person can ever make. Thank you for being here with us today. We will see you in the next one.